Hello and welcome to Fantasy View, a podcast for reviews of fantasy novels. I'm Jason Hubbard. Last time on Fantasy View, I covered The Sword of Shannara by Terry Brooks. It's basically a Lord of the Rings knockoff, but that wasn't my main problem with it. Check out the episode of that title to learn more. The sequel, which was released several years later, is called The Elfstones of Shannara. Is it better than the first, or does it repeat the same old mistakes? Or does it make all new ones? One thing's for sure, if I was ever caught in the schoolyard reading something called The Elfstones of Shannara, I would definitely get beat up and have my lunch money stolen. Thanks, Terry Brooks. Well, instead of the continuing adventures of Shea Omsford, who swings around the Sword of Shannara like he swings his we jump to several decades later. There's a new threat to the so-called Four Lands that doesn't involve the Warlock Lord, and the Sword of Shannara is hardly mentioned, nor does it ever appear. This makes Elfstones feel less like a sequel and more like a standalone story, which is okay by me because the first book bored me to tears, and I found it hard to care about the characters. The less Elfstones reminds me of Sword, the better. There are a few recurring elements, though. Alonon, the last of the Druids, makes a return. It may be decades later, but Alonon is about the same age. Maybe it's all the Botox injections. He discovers that a tree called the Elcrees, which stands within the Elven Kingdom, is dying. This is apparently a big deal because the Elcrees is more than just a tree. It is the earthly representation of a seal that has kept hundreds of demons locked away in another dimension called the Forbidding. The demons were sealed away thousands of years ago by the elves, but now the seal is simply wearing off, and the demons are starting to appear in the regular dimension. Alonon, who's a big know-it-all, informs the Elven King what's happening, and then he sets off to do the only rational thing to do in the face of such looming terror. Recruit a single young man to do his dirty work. This young man is Will Omsford, Will spelled with only one L, who is the grandson of Shea. Alonon says he wants to recruit Will precisely because he's Shea's grandson, and he hopes that Shea's dependability has rubbed off on him. And why not, If the great leaders of North Korea have proven anything, it's that crazy can certainly rub off on family members, so why not dependability? Actually, it's not just Will the Druid is looking for. He also wants Emberly Lesidel. At least I think that's how you say that name. I'm just saying it the way it looks like to me. She is the runaway elven princess who happens to live not too far away. Rather than eating cake and playing polo every day, she is running an orphanage. Because having a character do that is usually the author's way of saying, you might not like her right away, but damn it, I'm gonna make you like her. Emberly was once a caretaker of the Elcrees. Now the tree always has a number of caretakers, and they are usually all boys. Now one day, the boys wanted to officially make Emberly one of them, so they wanted her to participate in a hazing ritual. But she said screw that, and so she ran away. Okay. And that last part doesn't really happen, but wouldn't it be gruesome and funny at the same time if it did? Alonon and Will find Emberly and say she must return to the Elven capital because she is, get this, the chosen one of the Elcrees. Thus, only she can restore the tree somehow. Emberly, being the strong-willed young girl that she is, says hells no, and locks herself up in the orphanage. But she gets attacked by demon wolves of all things, so she agrees to flee to the capital. So after Emberly is reunited with her estranged father, the king, she is told that she has to go to some secret sacred place with the Elcree seed, thus giving us an excuse for there being a magical journey. Alonon, being the crazy stubborn bastard that he is, insists that Will accompany her to this place. So it's just the two of them going at it alone, right? Well, I know, several soldiers also go with them, which gives the story some brownie points for being reasonably realistic. Soon after Will and Emberly leave the capital, the seal to the Forbidding breaks, and a buttload of demons appears, and they march towards the Elven capital, opening cans of whoop-ass on the way. And of course, it's up to Alonon and the Elven Kingdom to slow their advance. Okay, in case my snarky storytelling threw you off, I actually like Elfstones. I think it's a big improvement over the first story. I also find that I prefer having a man and woman be the lead characters. What can I say? I try to sound like a macho tough guy on this little show of mine, but I prefer reading about men and women relating to each other over a bunch of dudes going to defeat some evil overlord. So is this a romantic story? Well, yes and no. The two leads certainly grow closer, but it never gets to the point where there's some positively lovey-dovey crap going on, because Will and Emberly are more focused on the mission they must fulfill. I can't really say I prefer stories that are like this, but here it certainly works. Brooks manages to tease the reader without ever actually asking, will they or won't they? The story is really all about the adventure, but with a dash of romance thrown in because, if it wasn't there, it would be missed. So our lead heroes may or may not suck each other's faces, but are they at least good characters? Why, yes, I think so. Emberly was meant to be the strong female character that Sword of Shannara didn't have. She can be bullheaded and headstrong, though reasonably so. So it makes her endearing whenever she lets down her guard and does what is obviously the right thing. Will Ohmsford, as the lead character, is a definite improvement over Shea from the first book. Now, Shea was meant to be a kind of everyman character who many readers can identify with. But just because a character is relatable doesn't necessarily mean he's interesting. Shea is a mostly reactive character who only acts if something happens or if he's issued an order. Will, on the other hand, proves able to come up with his own ideas and act on them, thanks to his background in medical training. I know this isn't some kind of mind-blowing breakthrough in storytelling. I'm just saying that the protagonist in the sequel is more likable and worthy than his grandfather in the first book. About the only bad thing about Will is that he's never armed with a conventional weapon. Now, you would think that if he were to venture into dangerous territory, he'd be given something like a short sword, a bow and arrows, or even a simple dagger. Instead, Alonon only gives him the Elfstones. Yes, I can't believe I've talked for this long without mentioning the Elfstones from the title. The Elfstones are also a returning element from the first book. They are 3 blue glassy stones that can shoot a beam of light and totally decimate bad guys. Only one of royal elven blood can use them, which is another reason why Alonon chose Will to be his his henchman. The Elfstones prove very useful, of course, but Will can only use them if he balances his heart, mind, and body together. A usual theme found in fantasy. Ultimately, the Elfstones prove to be all that Will needs, yet I still think he should have been given another weapon which he could use if the Elfstones happen to not work. There are several central villains in the story. One of them is a demon called the Reaper, a Jason Voorhees type of character that stalks Will and Emberly. And there's the demon leader called the Dagma Moor, a magician with the head of a cat. While the Reaper can be pretty scary, just imagine him with a hockey mask on, the Dagma Moor is unimpressive. He never talks, never says stupid lines you might hear in a cheesy 80s action movie. He just leads the demon army and that's it. Oh, and he shoots fireballs, but I'd rather he have a personality instead. The writing in Elfstones is a bit better than in Sword. It's still awfully wordy, but I can sense that Brooks was going for some restraint. He also learned not to make his paragraphs so damn long. Oh, there are still long paragraphs, but not at the legendary lengths that made Sword of Shannara such a chore to slog through. I think the sections that deal with the advancement of the demon army could have been better, though, although the problem might actually be lying within me. You see, I always tried to picture the demon army moving very fast, so fast the elves find it hard to keep track of them. Since they're going so fast, I think there should be a sense of urgency. But as I kept reading on and on with a few important developments happening, that sense of urgency faded. Again, it might just be me with this problem, but it reflects how the author can take his sweet time describing many action scenes that are supposed to be frantic. So Elfstones is definitely a superior sequel. It strays from any Lord of the Rings parallels, and I for one found this story to be quite enjoyable. As you might have noticed, this may be the second entry in the Sword of Shannara Trilogy, but the actual Sword of Shannara is nowhere to be found in the story. That's because its usefulness had outlived itself, so it had no part to play here. The trilogy was simply named after the first book in the series, regardless of whether the magical MacGuffin appeared in all three entries. Now, before I close out, let me tell you a kind of personal story. One day, I walked into a GameStop store to pre-order a game. I had on me my copy of Elfstones, and I set it on the counter to go through my wallet. The store clerk noticed it, and he recommended a certain other fantasy author. That author was George R.R. Martin, and the series he wrote that the clerk specifically mentioned was A Song of Ice and Fire. And that recommendation got me to read all 4 books, the only ones that were out at the time, before I had even heard that a TV adaptation was being made for HBO, which is pretty sweet. So the Elfstones of Shannara was a step up for the Shannara Trilogy. Could Terry Brooks continue improving with the third entry, the Wish Song of Shannara? Check in on the next episode of Fantasy View to find out. Thanks for listening, and please, keep reading.